Um, Looking at our agenda, we have Rupert Ross Jr., who is going to give a presentation. And oh, there's Akima, so we do have a quorum. Thank you very much. We have Akima, Devin, Alicia. Good. We'll get started. Imani? Imani?
I'm so sorry. I was trying to get off of mute there.
Oh, okay. Would you introduce um, Rupert Ross Jr. and our guests for this evening? And we do have a quorum because Akima just got one.
Okay, great. Um, yes, I would love to. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. So, I'm really excited tonight. We are joined by one of my favorite delegates, who is the chair of our Government Structure Committee. And so Delegate Ross served on the Third Constitutional Convention. He was the president of the Fourth Constitutional Convention. He is an avid Frederictonian and a proud Crucian. He has brought, I would say without a doubt, the most institutional knowledge, historic relevance, and grounding in the sense of the mission of bring the Constitution home. That call to action of any of the delegates, which I think is such an important and pivotal role for him to play. I'm honored to work with him on the Government Structure Committee. I've learned so much, not just about government structure and the Constitutional Convention, but also just disposition and the art of working well with people. You could tell his background in education by the way that he shows up and offers grace and patience to others. I hope some of that continues to rub off on me. But I'm just really excited to introduce him. Of course, all of the delegates know him. I'm sure we have our consistent members of the public who are listening in on YouTube as well, who have gotten to know and love Delegate Ross. And so today he is going to talk to us about the definition of the Virgin Islander. And so it's not just him teaching us history. He is one of many of you delegates who carved the history, made the history, has been there. I hear he was rebel rousing in his teens, 20s, and 30s, like Rudell and I find ourselves doing now. So I'm really interested to hear his perspective, and I don't doubt that this will be a very fruitful conversation for all of us that are blessed to partake. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Chair Wells, if you have anything to say, but that's the introduction for Delegate Rupert Ross Jr. for us this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Imani. I worked with Rupert in numerous capacities at the Fifth Constitutional Convention. I know about him in election. I know about him in Rotary. So there's nothing else I can add to what you said except ditto. We can learn a lot from him. So welcome, Rupert Ross Jr.
Thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate the kind words and the great introduction being made by both you, Madam Chair, and Delegate Imani Daniel. Also one of my favorite delegates in the convention, and one that keeps me challenged at all times. I made a request to Imani to address this committee because I had received a report from the committee in the outlining what you had approved or reached consensus on so far. And the two areas that sort of popped out in front of me, one was your preamble, which is I'm going to say very little about this evening because that's a subject that can go either way. But my reason for the request, however, was my concern about the committee's approval of the language of the fifth as it relates to the definition of Virgin Islanders. And I'm going to say up front, my reason for making this request is because, given an opportunity before the convention, I was going to speak against what was the report indicated, the language that you have approved. And so therefore, I decided, rather than have you hear about my concerns in a full plenary sessions prior to adopting the language that you have, that the proper thing for me to do is to have share my thoughts with you before that, and see if it makes any relevance to what your discussions were. I have attempted to join the committee meeting on previous occasions, but was not successful in doing that. One who is celebrating his 83rd birthday in 2 days from now is not very proficient in these modern tools being used for communications today. So let me get down to my concern. And I'm going to go back and do a little bit of history, and I'm also going to do a little bit of observation of what I see is the situation not only in the Virgin Islands, but in the world today. And hopefully you will get a sense as to why I have a concern about the decision of the committee to use the definitions that were prepared by the fifth to recommend to the sixth that it use it forward. I'm going to go back to the fourth first. In the fourth constitution, in the third constitutional convention, there was no definition of Virgin Islands put in that document. In the fourth constitutional convention, after a serious discussion, the convention decided to put a definition of a Virgin Islander in the document. It did so basically based on the premise that people, not whether they're resident of a state or resident of a territory, particularly in the case of Puerto Rico, had defined in their constitution in 1952 who was a Puerto Rican. And as a result, and based on my experience, having been educated in Puerto Rico, both at the secondary and the university level, I became very sensitive to the fact that Puerto Ricans were very proud of the fact that their constitution defined who they were. And that whether they were in Italy, Germany, United States, or Japan, they could always say that they're Puerto Ricans. So the fourth basically went down that track and defined in the document who would be considered to be a Virgin Islander. As that issue, as I mentioned on the previous occasion, was raised a red flag once it was being reviewed by the Justice Department under the Reagan and Jimmy Carter administration, and also by the Congressional Committee on Interior, who was the committee that basically reviewed the document for submission to the broader House of Representatives. The reason why the document was approved by both entities is because they found that the definition did not have any other role to play in the Constitution other than define who was a Virgin Islander. Unlike the fifth, who proceeded again to define a Virgin Islander, they went further and they decided to define two types of Virgin Islanders. One who would be considered to be ancestral, and other who would be considered to be native. Now, uh, because the fifth used those definitions to give special privilege to people who were so-called um, property tax exemptions, for example, uh, to ancestral Virgin Islanders. Only native Virgin Islanders and ancestral Virgin Islanders could run for public office, etc., etc. Uh, the fifth basically raised a red flag first with the governor of the Virgin Islands, which was uh, John DeYoung at the time, and he did not feel comfortable sending the document to Congress, even to the president, even though the only role of the governor was to transmit the document, not to critique it. Eventually, when it got to the Obama administration, they raised the issue of the unconstitutionality of applying the definition and giving special privileges to the people so defined. Uh, you guys know the rest of the story. They asked that the convention meet and make proper adjustments. Apparently, it was not done in time frame. The legislature had given the convention additional time to make the adjustment, and it did not occur. So the document basically just faded into the limelight. Uh, I'm concerned, particularly in this time of the Trump Republican administration, both in Congress and in the executive branch, that the definitions will suffer the same fate. Now, this is not new. When the founding fathers wrote the original Constitution of the United States, uh, they did not include as uh, as U.S. citizens uh, the black American slaves who fought in the Constitution in the Revolution and caused the United States to be independent of England. Actually, they wrote in the Constitution, the original Constitution, that uh, black people, slaves, and their descendants were less than human beings, less than full human beings. I think they said they were 3/5 of a human being, something of that nature. As a result of that, it triggered eventually the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which gave people born in the United States birthright citizenship. Now, those of you who've been following the news are fully aware that the current president of the United States is trying to reverse that, the 14th Amendment, and automatically give birthright citizenship to those people who were born under the U.S. Constitution, under the U.S. flag. Now, it's ironic, if I may step aside, that in my research of the current membership of the Sixth Constitutional Convention says that at least 40%, almost half, the members of the delegates in the Constitution were born of U.S. Virgin Island parents, but born on the U.S. mainland. Why am I saying that? Well, for those of us who were not born in the U.S. mainland, under the U.S. Constitution, are not eligible to run for president. Those who were, once if they so choose and reestablish residency in the United States, they are eligible to run for president of the United States. Because they may be considered Virgin Islanders, residents of domicile in the Virgin Islands, they may not be able to vote, which is sort of crazy. But that's basically where we are. Those of us who were born in the Virgin Islands, of parents who were born in the Virgin Islands, uh, don't have and continue to reside in the Virgin Islands, don't have the right to run for the presidency of the United States, and we don't have the right to vote for the presidency of the United States. So this division of definition of residents of communities continue to hamper people getting together and focusing on one mission. It's also ironic that when Christopher Columbus came to our part of the world and named the people who resided, named the islands the Virgin Islands, the people who followed him divided us into two different groups. So those of us who live in the U.S. Virgin Islands are not considered to be the same type of people who live in the British Virgin Islands. And some people who were born in the U.S. Virgin Islands of British Virgin Islands parentage, they are, quote, belongers in the British Virgin Islands, and those who are not born are not. I'm saying that to say is that the colonial process of over the years, over the centuries, have basically caused people to be divided, even though they come from the same upbringing, which was Mother Africa. In Southern Africa, the African Zulus who are strong and vibrant entities in the area in Southern Africa were divided into two groups. Half of them now live in South Africa, and they speak a language similar to the neighboring Zulu who live in neighboring countries like Botswana, etc. It sort of reminds me that those of us who were born in St. Croix speak a slightly different Virgin Islands English than those of you who were born in St. Thomas. My problem that I have is that if we continue down this path of seeking to call our people, designate our people by different names, and giving special privilege to different people, we will not eventually have a united Virgin Islands seeking the better good for all the people of the Virgin Islands. We would always have in the background, not maliciously, but that's the way it is. I would always be known as a Crucian, a favorite son of Frederickstead. So that means I shouldn't be in Christianstead too late at night, and so forth and so on. And we continue to do this to ourselves. I'm going to share with you another thought. You know, I had there's a great grandfather who came from Montserrat and eventually ended up in the Virgin Islands and had children. And his son had children. His children had children. Under our definition, some people may say they are native Virgin Islanders, the generation that currently exists, are native Virgin Islanders. Another person became an offspring of a lady in St. Kitts who was aborted by a governor general who was the family member of the Queen of England at the time. So she had the royal blood of the English family in her lifeline. And another family became an offspring of a slave who resided in St. Croix before the United States became independent in 1737. And his offspring, 6 generations later, still live in St. Croix. I guess that would be a beautiful definition of ancestral Crucian or Virgin Islander. And then there's another Virgin Islander whose grandfather married an offspring of an indigenous Indian in St. Croix. And therefore, that person also became an ancestral Virgin Islander from way back before Columbus came. Now, I share that with you because the person who I'm describing is myself. All of those things I described. A great grandfather from Montserrat, offspring of the Queen of England, who had a Governor General in St. Kitts. And for those of you who are familiar with St. Kitts, you're familiar with Warner Park. That's what it was named after. His son came to St. Croix and married my grandmother, who was a descendant of the native Indians in St. Croix. And obviously my father, he's a descendant of a slave in St. Croix from 1737. So I'm all of the above. And I think that when we seek to divide ourselves in an effort to identify ourselves, all we're going to do is create problems for future generations, because some people will want to be known as ancestral Virgin Islanders, others have no choice but being native Virgin Islanders. And basically, people who would fall in the category of native Virgin Islands are people who migrated to our territory since we became part of the United States. People from the Eastern Caribbean, people from the neighboring Latin countries of Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic, who gave birth to children here in St. Croix. You know, and I'll give you one more story. When I was the district governor for District 7020 in Rotary, I visited a family in Rotown, Tortola, and the parents proudly introduced me to their daughter and said that she was born in St. Croix. I turned to her and I says, "Oh, then you're a Crucian like me." She says, "No, I'm a BV Islander." Her mother, when she was about to give birth, traveled to St. Croix, stayed in a hotel overnight, went to the hospital, gave birth to this little girl, got back on the plane, and went back to BVI. She's never been in St. Croix one day of her life after that. But they did it because when she became 18, she becomes eligible for all the benefits of education and the U.S. mainland because she was born in St. Croix. And I'm going to close by saying, now if you listened to President Trump today, talking about removing citizenship from people who were born in the United States, physically born in the United States, but not of U.S. president, U.S. citizens, removing them even at the early age of birth. from the United States, and it's estimated to be in the millions. So children of people who came to work in the United States on a visa and give birth to a child, according to him, is not a U.S. citizen because he wants to remove the condition of birthright citizenship from those individuals. Dreamers who came to the United States to study and gave birth to a child, he wants to remove that birthright citizenship from that child. So just like the Virgin Islands acquired citizenship because Congress said, if you're born in the Virgin Islands, you're a U.S. citizen, Trump and his colleagues can take that away. We need, not from those of you who were born in the United States, by the way, but it can take it away from me, who was not born in the United States. If we are going to go forward as one community, we cannot have two definitions. We need to have one so the world can know loud and clear who we are as a people. And those of us who live together would also treat each other as one family. Not you from there and I from here, which is a burden that we have placed on our society from the colonial era. You from St. Thomas, I from St. Croix, you from Frederickston, I from Christiansted, and so forth and so on. I'm hoping that this convention and this definition would take that stigma away from our people. And if and when it's approved, we can all act as one family. Thank you for giving this opportunity to address you and share my thoughts with you.
You're quite welcome, Rupert. I remember when we started to discuss this particular topic, and I said, my mother, my father, and my grandparents are from Tortola. My brother and I were born in St. Thomas. We can get dual citizenship because of our parents. But my son couldn't get dual citizenship. He had to get a passport card. And I would not be, and then I made reference to 1917 because that was what I remembered from the 5th Constitutional Convention. And my mother wasn't born in 1917, so she was neither fish nor fowl. She was not in Tortola, nor was she in St. Thomas. So I understand your dilemma. I'd like to hear from members. I want to welcome Member Hendricks, and I'd like
Good
to
evening.
welcome in the audience Mr. Richardson. And Mr. Richardson, you could put back up your comments. I can read those into the record, and then we'll continue. All right, Mr. Richardson said, technically, once a quote born unquote citizen, the person would have to reside in the United States to be a qualified voter for president, to then run for president of the United States. Anyone would like to respond to that? Then Mr. Richardson continues, Hawaii at the time of drafting their constitution had a similar situation. They did not ratify a native Hawaiian definition, but enshrined under their Article 12, Hawaiian Affairs, Section 6. I'm sorry, Section 7. So the phrase Native Hawaiian exists in their constitution and is used 12 times in that document, but in all caps, solely in/under Hawaiian affairs. However, the use, parentheses, Native Hawaiian, end parentheses, has no definition. So those are some comments from Mr. Richardson.
May I just make a quick comment on the being able to run for president? Because I was looking it up and shocked that this is the first time I'm realizing or making this connection. But what it said is that to run for president, you have to be born in the United States or in one of its incorporated territories. You have to be a natural born citizen, 35 years of age, resident of the United States for 14. When it talks about a natural born citizen, it's talking about being born in the United States or its incorporated territories. This is an unincorporated territory. And so it leaves a legal ambiguity and legal loophole, right? And so it would be a question of, if one of us chose to run for president, would it be challenged in court? Who's on the court and what would the court find? But it is not inalienable, clearly given right to us in the colonies. It is to be decided by the Supreme Court. So I just wanted to make that clear on the, are we allowed, are people born in the Virgin Islands eligible to run for president?
So according to the ambiguity, yes, they are, and no, they're not.
If I may,
Yes, you may.
if you're born in the Virgin Islands, you're not. If you're born on the mainland of Virgin Islands parents, you're eligible.
But what
You're eligible.
Imani just read, it doesn't say that, though. Can you read it again, Imani?
Delegate Ross is correct. It says to be born in the United States or
Correct.
in an incorporated territory.
Oh, we're unincorporated. Okay.
Correct.
If I may use an example, when Barry Goldwater decided to run for president of the United States, at the time he was born, Arizona was a corporated territory. It was not a state. And he was able to run because he was in a corporated territory. We are an incorporated territory, not eligible to run.
Other comments from other delegates? So, Rupert, what is your suggestion? Because I heard exactly what you said. What is your suggestion for crafting what needs to be in this section from the 6th Constitutional Convention, so we don't have what happened in the 4th, the 5th, and the 3rd?
Well, the gentleman from the public, his name was Richardson.
Yes, he said, Mr. Richardson, yes.
Again, he gave an example what Hawaii ended up doing, right? But the Article 12 that deals with Hawaiian affairs, that talks about special rights for, quote, Native Hawaiians, is now being challenged. It passed. By the way, if my memory serves me right, Hawaii had, I'm going to use the word multiple, much more than we have, multiple conventions in an attempt to write a constitution so that they could become incorporated and eventually become a state. And what happened in Hawaii to the quote Native Hawaiians is that what word I want to use, the ability, not ability, oh wow, for Hawaii to become palatable to Washington, to become a state, the population of Hawaii had to change. It had to be inhabited by native-born Americans on the West Coast. It had to be inhabited by a large Japanese population displaced by the war, so that even in Hawaii, the native Hawaiian was not, quote, the dominant population entity in the state. The reverse of that is happening in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is predominantly non-American born. There's a resistance at the American side to allow Puerto Rico to a Spanish-speaking country, an entity, to become a state. Even though the current governor is a Republican, the current Republican president says he's not in favor of Puerto Rico becoming a state. Because Puerto Rico has 3.5 million people, just about. Spanish is the predominant language. They would have more delegates in the House of more members in the House of Representatives than Wyoming, Montana, South and North Dakota put together. And they will be predominantly non-Republican. They're not interested in making Puerto Rico become a state for those reasons.
Well, this has given me some pause, and it's interesting. Let's hear from some other delegates, or we'll let persons in the waiting room put in their comments. Rudell, I'm surprised you're quiet. Devin, Akima, Lydia.
You know, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We all have stories to tell. And it's very strange.
Get closer to your microphone.
I said we all have stories to tell. My grandfather was born on St. Kitts. He was 7 years old when he stowed away on a boat from St. Kitts, and that boat came to St. Thomas. He was rebelling because his mom had beaten him, and he ran away from home and went down to the boat dock. When he got to St. Thomas, 7 years old, didn't know anything, heard a church bell ringing, which happened to be the Catholic Church. And he walked to the Catholic Church and he sat on the step. He spent the night on the step. The morning when the nuns passed, they saw him there, they said nothing. When they passed back that evening, they saw him, they said nothing. But the next morning when they saw him still sitting there, they asked him some questions like, what's your name? And he was able to tell them. What's your mother's name? He was able to tell them. Where is she? He did not know. Those nuns took him in and gave him shelter and had him ringing the church bells in his early and formative years. He never went back to St. Kitts. What is he? All his children were born on St. Thomas. Grandchildren, which I am one of them.
Comments? Mr. Richardson said, there also is no formal definition of natural born or U.S. citizen, which is why the, quote, debate, unquote, about removing birthright citizenship exists. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution had no idea of, quote, unincorporated, unquote.
Yes. May I have the floor?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, I was going to raise that point in the conversation. As it stands right now, from a legal definition standpoint, natural born citizen in the constitutional context has never been defined by any Supreme Court. So it would take a Virgin Islander who is running a Virgin Island, who was born in the Virgin Islands, who has met the requirements of living in the continental United States for 14 years, and so forth and so on, to actually run, and it to be challenged for the definition to be either expanded or restricted, because there have been many cases of it being expanded thus far, such as John McCain, who was born in the Panama Canal during the construction of the Panama Canal, who was still eligible to run because that was a territory of the United States while it was being built. So I do kind of disagree with Delegate Ross's assessment that a Virgin Island that was born in the Virgin Islands would not be eligible to run. I do think it's legally ambiguous right now, and it will take a Supreme Court ruling to actually settle on that topic. In terms of Delegate uh, Hendrick's question about her grandfather, I think the answer is he was a man a child who was born in St. Kitts, who was raised in the Virgin Islands, and I think it's very interesting, and being a Virgin Islander, to see that we are one of the very few places that somebody could just come down here 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months, and then they automatically could claim that they're from the Virgin Islands. That doesn't exist in any other place in the world. I can't go over to China and then say I'm Chinese because I lived there for 2 months, all right? But that's something that is a standard practice in the Virgin Islands, for whatever reason, all right? And I do think it's important that we do have a definition. I can agree with Delegate Ross that having two separate tiers might create some divide. So if we can get it down to one, so be it. But I do think it's very important that we do have a definition of what a Virgin Islander is in this document, because the Virgin Islands and the people of the Virgin Islands, especially the native-born people of the Virgin Islands, are very important and special people that deserve to be given that privilege of belonging. Right? Again, the Virgin Islands, right, especially St. Thomas, St. Croix, and St. John, are the one of the oldest colonies in the northern hemisphere, right? We have never been a free place to be able to say claim as our own. So I do think it's important that we are able to claim at least the definition of I'm a native born Virgin Islander, or I'm an ancestral Virgin Islander, and be able to claim that. And I don't think we should have special rights or privileges, right? I do think there's some restitution by our colonial colonizers, right? But I think just having a definition without special privileges would be suffice. I think that's what we have collectively decided as a convention. I think the fifth went way too far in giving special privileges to ancestral Virgin Islanders, such as you could only run for governor if you're an ancestral Virgin Islander, which created a whole dilemma with the Young, where he did not feel comfortable to basically submit a document to Congress saying that he should never be governor again, because he was not an ancestral Virgin Islander, and also given the land rights. But I think we have done a good job of removing those carve outs of special privileges. But I do agree that we could still have a discussion of making it one definition versus two definitions.
Thank you. Another chat, Mr. Wells wrote, the population in Puerto Rico as of 2024 is 3,203,295. 3,203,295 as of 2024.
May I have the floor, Delegate Wells?
I'm sorry?
May I have the floor, Delegate Wells?
Yes, you may.
Yes. So during one of our earlier committee meetings, if not in May, possibly June, I recall Delegate Carrington shared that, Virgin Islanders should have special protections when it comes to our land. So, for example, Delegate Wells, I believe you are stationed on the mainland. And in the mainland, many of us Virgin Islanders, we can pack our suitcase and we can purchase land in any state, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe Delegate Carrington was stressing the importance of Virgin Islanders having protections in terms of first preference to purchasing land, so that in the long run, Virgin Islanders still have what's left. I say all of that to say, in regards to Delegate Ross's statement earlier, I do see the sentiments being shared in terms of having that clear definition of what a Virgin Islander or native Virgin Islander is and is not. And I think that, as we go forth, if the language that's currently enacted for who and what a native Virgin Islander is not seemingly given enough protections, I think that is a conversation we do need to have. And for Delegate Hendricks, as Delegate Rudel Hodge just shared, in terms of her grandfather, I too agree. He has integrated himself into the culture, but it does bring a question: what is he? Like you shared, Delegate Lydia Hendricks. So those are my thoughts on the meeting thus far.
Thank you very much, Delegate Richardson. I I I am here not by choice, but my place of abode is in the Virgin Islands, and I doubt that I can buy purchase anything here. I don't vote here. I don't do anything here. I just live here until I get to go back home. So I don't know how it is with my son. I know he votes here, but he was born in St. Thomas, and now he lives in Texas. But let's hear from some other delegates or some other members of who are on in the waiting room.
May I?
Sure.
Delegate Daniel. Okay, so I think I'm always complaining about like the plight of millennials, and we have it so hard, right? I know you guys are probably sick of that. And I think that I have failed to truly account for the experience of the elders, right? Like life simply was more challenging with the lack of just development and technology, right? I also fail to account for the overt anti-Black racism that you all must have felt locally, regionally, and nationally, right? And so I do want to just create space for, we cannot compare our generational struggles because what was then is not now, and what is now is not then and will not be in the future, right? But I do want to highlight what I think is the scariest part of the millennial experience in the Virgin Islands, and that is our exposure. And I think that is very new, right? The internet and social media have left the Virgin Islands incredibly exposed. And we're being forced to compete globally, where I feel like before you all were quite insulated, and feel free, the elders here, to correct me if I'm wrong. But I imagine back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, you were competing against each other, maybe regionally. And then, of course, you were going off to the States to study and competing there, some coming back. But I feel like it probably felt more isolated than it does now. And now we are being asked to compete here at home with very little resources globally. And I think that feeling is what's like pushing me into a corner to feel like I need to define who I am and where I come from. And so, and that is just a very almost like survivalist tactic that I'm trying to crystallize and put into words in this conversation. I think for like the first time, right? Like after hearing Delegate Ross's presentation, I'm really trying to like dig deep inside and express why I was supporting the definition of Virgin Islanders in the Constitution, right? Now, this is aside from the tactic that I've been talking about of laying the groundwork for reparations, which I strongly believe I'm going to see in my lifetime in some degree, maybe not fully, but in some degree of like global reckoning of reparations for colonial harm. And so my support of the definition of a Virgin Islander has always, I want it to be clear that it's always been grounded in identity and justice, not in division. And so I hear Delegate Ross's call, and I'm hoping that we find a middle ground that can honor this identity and justice that we're hoping to lay the groundwork for, but also not divide us as people, right? But do it in a way that is honoring what was and what can and should be, while also very much acknowledging that the Virgin Islands has always been a transient mix-up salad bowl, callaloo pot, whatever you want to call it, right? But a very transient, diverse place since the colonizers showed up. Before that, it was probably a very chill, homogenous. Of course, there's different tribes and different cultures. You know, they get along as good as they can. But, you know, since colonization of, 530 years ago, it has been very transient. And then the last thing I'll say is that race, ethnicity, identity, culture, residency, like all of these things are related, but very different. And so if we are defining things in the Constitution, I just want us all to be very clear on what exactly we are defining and the purpose for which we are defining it, so that we can be incredibly precise in the action, and then we can be very strong in the way that we defend it to the public. So that's just what I wanted to add there. So thank you so much for the time, Chair Wells. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I remember the Fifth Constitutional Convention and somebody probably saying, paraphrasing a lot of what you just said. And then, of course, there was somebody on the other side who spoke about the ancestral and who should be able to do what and whatever. So we had this robust conversation. And Rupert, you can jump in anytime here, that this was one of the issues and one of the areas that took so much time. I mean, I think our president, who was the man for the funeral home, I can't remember his name right now, G. Luz James. He had to call a break. We had to have a break so we could get up and walk around and stretch and get some water or something, because it really got a lot heated sometimes. So we're not experiencing anything different. It's just a different year now than what we did in the Fifth Constitutional. So I thought I heard someone's voice.
If I may,
Rupert, yes.
Since you called my name, I'm always pleased when I hear Imani articulate, as she always does, basically what my vision is for being here today. I'm sharing history, yes, but it's not about for me to be recognized. It's for my children and their children to have a place in this world as Virgin Islanders. There's nothing you can do for me. I've been through that role. But I don't want my children fighting with other Virgin Islanders because one is native and one is ancestral. I want them fighting because they're both Virgin Islanders, to make this place a better place for them to live in. Not for me, for them to live in. And as I said before, our colonizers, our predecessors, when they wanted to divide us, they gave us different names. Yeah. So as I said, I lived in the period where going to Christian State at night was not a favorite pastime of people living in Fredericksted. I don't want my children to grow up like that. And their children, I want them to grow up knowing that they are Virgin Islanders wherever they are in the Virgin Islands. And so those of you who know me, I know my family, I have more family members in St. Thomas than I have in St. Croix. So there's no way I can't like people from St. Thomas. But I'm trying to avoid us going down that road again of handing our children a divided plate from which to work. Because it's just like it has been done in the past. Just it divided the tribes of Africa, and that they're fighting today for their role in this war. Just like the U.S. Constitution divided the people who fought in the Revolution, and on and on and on I'd go. I don't want to leave a legacy of us dividing our people so that my children and their children could have to correct the problem like the American people did in the 14th Amendment to give birthright citizenship to all Americans who were born in America before someone comes like the current president and decide that birthright citizenship is not good. And only special people are entitled to be United States citizens. United States citizens. That is the battle I want to avoid.
Well, I can empathize with you, Rupert, because I remember my mother saying, God rest her soul. I guess someone must have mentioned it at one of those political meetings that they would have down by the market square, that nothing good can come out of Savon. So I am always, and Member Hendricks too, we always say we're Savaneros. And then, of course, people who don't know what Savon was like 60 years ago would think it's just broken houses and people from DR who lived there who the ice went and chased them and they lost their shoes and stuff. But Savon was a
Prominent community.
thriving and prominent community. And the name alone let you know that there were many persons who lived there who had skills and they were known to be dressmakers and suit makers. And of course, we have a large cemetery that's there that probably people don't even remember. The Danish cemetery there, they know the one on near the Western Cemetery, but it's another one up in Savannah. So it was a prominent people from there. And we've had lieutenant governors from there. And of course, John DeYoung from DeYoung Gut.
Doctors.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of people. But I remember, just like you said about going to Christiansen, because you're from Frederickson, when we would say we were going to, we're from Savannah, people just look down their nose at us. Of course, the young men were able to go to Buckle and down past Catholic Church, but we couldn't travel because you didn't go as a young lady. You didn't go anyplace. You went with your mother or you stayed home. So, and I hear Member Hendricks in the background agreeing because we're from the same area. We're Savaneros, and bringing the point. I just looked at an old T-shirt I had, and Ziska Williams had was in starting this group that spoke about Native Virgin Islanders. And I was trying to remember who was a part of this group. We paid dues and we gave out a couple of scholarships at some of the high school graduation, CAHS and Eudora Ken. And some of the persons who came to the meeting, I didn't know them, they didn't know me, but because of where they live and because of their age. But we were incorporated in everything. Native Virgin Islanders was the name, because I remember the name is in the back of our T-shirts, and I've saved that and I moved it from one place to the other. And I understand well what you're saying, Rupert. And Devin, I'm not hearing from you at all.
Yeah, I'm listening intently to everybody. Good night, everybody. Good evening, I should say.
Good evening.
I want, and I listened carefully to Delegate Ross, but what I like from Delegate Ross is some finality with respect to what he would recommend as a definition of Virgin Islander.
Rupert?
What I would recommend?
Yes.
It would be easy for me to start from the definition that I got Congress to agree with from the 4th. But basically, since we're starting from the 5th, I think the committee needs to remove the words ancestral Virgin Islander from that definition, and make, if you're born in the Virgin Islands, you're native Virgin Islands. If you're born in the appearance of Virgin Islands, you're a Virgin Islander, period.
Can I read what was in the 4th? I have it
I
here.
was just going to ask that.
It's very simple. It says the definition of a Virgin Islander, Section 1. A Virgin Islander is A person born in the Virgin Islands, or B, a person who is descendant of at least one parent who was born in the Virgin Islands. And then it goes on to talk about citizenship, but that is the definition of Virgin Island. Either you born here or one of your parents was born here.
And that's from the 4th or the 5th? The 4th, because the 5th didn't say anything.
That is how simple that was. But let me tell you why the document was not approved. Right? 2 days before, and you probably have heard me say this before, 2 days before the voting on the document, the then president of the Senate, I'm not going to call the name, the then president in the Senate used her platform on TV and radio throughout the territory and urged her supporters not to vote for the document because the document did not recognize her 2 adopted children from a European country as Virgin Islanders.
Okay, so you say that to say what?
I'm saying that to say that even though it was that simple and direct, it is not always. There are people in our territory who feel that they should have been part of that definition. People who migrated to the Virgin Islands to make a living,
78.
professionally or not, born someplace in the United States or someplace in the world, and because the document didn't call them Virgin Islanders, they were offended by that. But that would be
No, the president. Who did you?
That would be starting from there.
I'm sorry?
Starting from that definition, moving forward 40 years later, I think the committee could come up with a definition that applies to all people who are Virgin Islanders.
All people who are Virgin Islands, as you say,
or descendant of Virgin Islands parents,
okay,
descendant of people born in the Virgin Islands.
So you the 4th, which was just read. What are your thoughts on the 4th definition?
I had no problem with the 4th.
80.
I defended it before Congress. I defended it before 2 U.S. government. People born in the Virgin Islands are Virgin Islands. People who born parents who were born in the Virgin Islands are Virgin Islanders. Done. Basically, that's what the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says. And corrected the original document that did not make
Honestly, it was her then. You see, they
the
weren't
slaves
14
citizens of the United States. Which, by the way, the current presidents want to change.
Excuse me, may I?
Yes, you may.
I would like to be the devil's advocate. Remember a few years ago when St. Thomas didn't have certain facilities and persons who were pregnant and were having complications had to go to Puerto Rico to birth their children? So that child was born in Puerto Rico. May I ask, so is that child considered a Puerto Rican?
Thank you, Delegate Hendricks.
And recently there was something about applying for a birth certificate. I know quite a few of my friends whose children were born in Puerto Rico.
If I may.
Yes, you may.
Okay.
I remember when the casino law was being debated. I was part of Senator Bryant's staff at that point in time, and we did a presentation at the legislature because through that uh, through that legislation there was a definition of Native Virgin Islanders, Native Virgin Islander, and during the presentation, Murray Moorhead gave a presentation, and he made a distinction based on his study with respect to nativity and who's considered what what defines nativity. I think that the fourth definition takes into account what he delivered. He said that there's nativity by situs, situs, by sight where you're born, and there's nativity by sangre, sangre, by blood. So, given that presentation and hearing the definition of the fourth, it takes into account both situs and sangre, and I think that that's a very good starting point for me with respect to crafting a definition of a Virgin Islander or native Virgin Islander. um, Certainly, a, a woman from the Middle East stepping off the plane in St. Croix uh, and her water bag bus, excuse, and she's rushed to the hospital and have a baby. Would that baby be considered a native Virgin Islander? Similar to the example just raised about people who just happened to go to Puerto Rico. The woman had to go to Puerto Rico because there were issues in St. Thomas. Is that baby a Puerto Rican?
May I?
Yes, you may. Are you wait a minute, are you finished, Devin?
No, no, no. I'm just raising some questions actually.
All right, okay. Yes, you may.
I think again, when we look at the strict definition of what native means, it means being born or being born of a particular place, right? So in the example that Miss Hendricks raised, which the child was born in Puerto Rico, they are a native born Puerto Rican in terms of where they were born, but they are were most likely was raised as a Virgin Islander, which is it's similarities, but they're not nuanced differences because they're not the same boxes to be checked, right? And similar to that, then the example of the Middle Eastern woman, and I actually learned recently we should not be saying Middle Eastern anymore because that's a very colonial term, and we should try to decolonize our language because that Middle East is really North Africa or Eastern Asia, all right? There's no Middle East of anything. Nonetheless, that child would be a native born Virgin Islander with Middle Eastern, or sorry, misspoke, with North African or East Asian roots because of their lineage of parents. But they are a native born Virgin Islander because they was born in the Virgin Islands. Just like if I was born in Germany, I would be a native born German because that's the place I was born. Now, there's still, we have to have a long conversation about where you're raised, because people do get attachment to the space, the areas that they're raised in. But where you're born as a check mark, it's always going to be the place that you're born.
May I?
Yes, you may.
I think this conversation highlights the efficacy of having different, I don't want to say categories because that feels a little eugenist and that's not what I'm getting at, but different groups of people, because you can have, just bear with me, I'm not going to be eloquent in this. We're going to navigate this together and hopefully it goes well, right? The ancestral Native Virgin Islander is due reparation, okay? The Virgin Islander is a cultural phenomenon that lots of people can find shared identity around. The resident of the Virgin Island is happenstance by existing on these rocks. And these are all things that can exist at the same time, but are different experiences in the same place by circumstance of our lineage. And one is not better than the other, but they are all truths worth acknowledging, in my opinion. And one truth should not threaten another truth. You can be ethnically or ancestrally Dominican and come thrive and find community residing in the Virgin Islands. I can be ancestrally Virgin Islands and move to Japan and find meaningful community there without having to claim that I'm Japanese. And so I feel like there must be a way that this plural society can honor who has been here and what is owed to them, while also making comfortable space and accounting for the other people who have chosen to join the society and better the society, and that we can celebrate the collectivity that comes of that. But I don't think we're going to find one size fits all definition, because that is simply not our experience. That is not our truth. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
Delegate Wells, may I have the floor?
Yes, you may, Delegate Richardson.
Yes. So I recognize Delegate Daniel's sentiments that this is in fact not a one-size-fits-all scenario. Earlier, during one of our earlier meetings for this committee, I did suggest the possibility of us adopting what the British Virgin Islands does in terms of, for allowing their citizens or, belongers to have different types of citizenship. So currently we know we have different types of people who come back and forth. They may have people on a student visa, may have people on a work visa, but like Delegate Daniel said, this is not a one-size-fits-all case. However, you're going to run into people who feel like, this is just an example, who feel like, thinking of our ancestors who fought in the United States war, maybe not all voluntarily, but they may have felt as though they don't have certain privileges, but they've done so many contributions to the United States in getting certain, freedoms. So that's all I have to share, Delegate Wells.
Thank you, Delegate Richardson. Um,
Oh,
how are we going to craft what we're saying? Some examples.
well, we have the language from the fourth, which I do think is worth expanding. I don't think we can just take a natalist approach here, right? I like the definition from the fourth. It's simple, right? You're born here, your parents born here. That takes me out of the running, because my parents were part of that flee to New York, where everybody in the 50s was born in New York, and then by the 60s they were back here, right? So that's not a reason to draft a constitution because Imani's no longer a Virgin Islander. I'll live. I'll get my due somehow, right? But I'm thinking there are other ways that you could qualify as a Virgin Islander. But I want to kind of take it an even step further and ask Delegate Ross a direct question.
Can you
Because
get closer to your microphone, Imani?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on my computer. Sorry. Is this any better?
That's better. Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to ask Delegate Ross a question. Of course, everybody can answer. We're not bound to define a Virgin Islander in this Constitution. So if
We're not.
if we are not disagreeing at all, this is a fascinating conversation. Again, the first time was also fascinating. Would it be better to just not define it and suggest that the first Constitutional Convention Amendment Squad tackles it? How tied are we to defining a Virgin Islander in this draft?
I'm not a member of your committee, so I'm gonna leave that up to you to decide. But I'd like to go back to what you described, however. And if I'm wrong, you said that your parents left the Virgin Islands, went to New York, And what happened? You were born in New York,
No, my
and they from that.
grandparents.
Okay, go ahead.
My grandparents went to New York, and so my father was born in New York, and I was
Fine,
also born in the States. But we all
fine.
grew up in the Virgin Islands and lived here as adults in the Virgin Islands,
So,
and
but
right?
your father, under the definition. Let me do. When my mother was born, she was a U.S. national. She was not even a U.S. citizen. Okay, she became a U.S. citizen by congressional act. I became a U.S. citizen because I was born in St. Croix. Let me flip to your scenario. Your grandfather was born in the Virgin Islands.
Yes.
He had a son who was a Virgin Islander. You're a descendant of that son. From
Yes,
my
but
definition, from where I stand by definition, even though you were born in New York, you're a Virgin Islander.
okay, because as it reads from the fourth, and we can wordsmith it. I was just using that as an example. It says B is a person who is a descendant of at least one parent who was born in the Virgin Islands. So for me, that was one generation of separation, not two.
Okay, that sounds correcter than that. Then you could make it. You could change that.
Right. I also think there's something to be said, though, to Delegate Hendrick's point about women who choose for maternal health. I think we're all aware of the abject risk of what it means to be a Black woman who chooses to give birth. And so for those women who chose to seek out potentially better medical care, right, which would affect where their children are born. And so I think there's something to be said about the being raised in the Virgin Islands, the graduating from a Virgin Islands school, right? I think there are other experiences besides just birth that do account for Virgin Islandsness. If we're not tying it to ancestry, then I do think that we could be more inclusive if that's the goal, is all I'm suggesting here.
Well, if I may,
Yes, you may.
I think the definition of the fourth ties it not only to place, but to ancestry, to blood. So the fact that someone was not born in the Virgin Islands, but born of parents who were born in the Virgin Islands, takes into account that ancestry, that blood. So I'm just saying that to say that the definition of the fourth takes both into account. Now, whether we want to expand it to say that you either born in the Virgin Islands or born of ancestors of the Virgin Islands, we might want to do that. But just trying to make the point that the definition as read from the fourth takes into account both situs and sanguine.
We have some comments from Mr. Richardson again. There's one. It shall be the policy of the governor of American Samoa to protect persons of Samoan ancestry against alienation. Samoa also doesn't define the territory has compelling interest in preserving the lands of Samoans for Samoans. The laws in conflict with the U.S. not displaced. And that's the reference is Chadwick versus Territorial Registrar, ASR 1979. And we have about the Middle East, how we won't say Middle East. We would say Southwest Asia or North Africa or SWANA. Northwest Africa or East Europe. All right, thank you. We've learned a lot of things here today. So I know we made reference to persons going to Puerto Rico to have their babies because of health wanting for better health and better facilities. I know particularly of some persons who would do the same thing from the British Virgin Islands. That's of course when we had better health facilities in when we're number one with the health facilities in the Virgin Islands. They'll come over on their boats and they'll stay at a hotel at night, and next they go to the hospital and have their child, and then take that child right back to Puerto Rico. I mean, right back to the BVI in a few days after they'd seen their physician. I don't know. Well, you have a birth certificate that you would get when you're born, wherever you're born, right? So that shows what you are. If you were born in Puerto Rico, you have a birth certificate that's Puerto Rican, no?
Yes.
And if you're born in the Virgin Islands, you have a birth certificate. We had that small little piece of 5.5 by 7 paper. Now you get a whole 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with a seal and everything. Looks very professional, saying where you were born.
Correct.
So, looking at the fourth Constitution, and the Senate President, Rupert Ali, didn't want to say, nothing is secret. Was that Ruby Rouse or John Maduro?
Ruby Rouse.
Okay, 1981. Okay, how do we craft Let me hear some comments.
Well, unfortunately, unless it's something that you need me present to say, I'm going to leave that the rest of that debate to you guys. I just want our process to come out, making our people feel, comfortable that the children in our future, will have a place not only to be recognized here at home but abroad.
Noted.
So, Rupert, you start the fire, now you're running? That's what you're saying?
Start the fire with the fire button, you go.
Because I'm confident that the firemen will put it out.
You're an arsonist, man. You're an arsonist.
Thank you
No,
so
I'm
much.
not running. Keep in mind now, I'm not running. Remember now, when I first saw the decision of the committee, I said to myself, no, I have to let them know my thoughts. But unless I could join your meeting, I could only do it when you present the document, your report to the plenary. And I didn't feel that was the right thing to do. I just want you to know where I'm coming from. So if it has merit, you can deal with it. If it doesn't, at least you know where I stand.
Well, thank you so much for having this discussion away from the plenary, away from whatever session we're going to have, because we've discussed this on more than one occasion, as you can tell. A lot of us have questioned because of where we were born. In fact, I remember starting off one of my meetings in late May or in June, right after I think Malik Sekou came on, and he was like, "So what am I? I'm a native Virgin Islander to me, because I was born in the Virgin Islands." But so thank you, Rupert. Is there any other questions or comment anyone would like to ask of Delegate Rupert Ross Jr. before he leaves us?
No questions, but I just want to thank you so much for your presentation, Delegate Ross. It was very informative, and that was a great conversation. And thank you, Chair Wells, for allowing the space.
Yes, it was very, very informative. Thank you. And thank you for reaching out and getting on here, Delegate Ross.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And,
no problem.
See you down the road.
All righty.
Once the fire is out.
My husband was a fireman, not me. Imani, I'm always asking you these questions from that the executive committee should be saying, but do you know where we are with getting a legal counsel?
I do not have any updates for legal counsel.
Okay. Um, so let me hear some concerns or some suggestions of what we should be presenting once we send our draft in to the executive council for the next plenary that should be coming up. Because this is very thought provoking, and we purposely we agreed that we weren't going to do anything because the fifth didn't have anything. But now that Rupert has brought another perspective, um, what is our thought?
Well, it seems like most of
Get closer
us
to your
like
microphone.
most of us sound like we like some of the language in the fourth. All we have to do is embellish it to make it what we really wanted to say.
Um, can we have a screen for the fourth, or it's too late for that? Especially this particular section. We're working on that as I speak. My IT person, my in-house IT, who's not well today.
Sorry.
Hmm.
Hey, Dee, I just emailed it to you, and it's on page 5 of the PDF.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if we have taken, this is just an aside, I'm just filling in while before that comes up. If we have taken this time, almost an hour and 45 minutes for our discussion, can you imagine when this comes up in the plenary session? Or some other venue where 15 of us are going to be fine.
Commenting.
Yes, and wordsmithing this area.
That's new language for me.
Wordsmithing?
Yes.
No, no,
Only since
okay.
I joined this constitutional convention, I've been hearing that word.
Oh no, I in the business department we had that.
Oh,
I mean, you're changing it. All you're doing is fixing the wording.
yeah, I know what it meant, but I never heard it used as a
Oh,
term.
okay. Well, we've learned a lot from this constitutional convention. I can tell you that. Those who've been
I'm
in
telling
the
you.
fourth, the fifth, the sixth, anyone, this is really an eye
Well, I know you've
opener.
been in
And
the
it's
parade
thanks to
before. This
people
is
like
my first.
Odell and Akima and Imani's. Thanks to them because the young ones.
Yeah, I know that. I know you've been in the parade before. This is my first hooray.
Oh well, I've really learned a lot. We have it. Okay. The fourth is coming up. We can just um Rudel?
Rudel tired from last night.
Oh. Oh, I'm just gonna say for one, but I remember, yes. Okay. I'm not gonna call you
I'm
anymore.
here. I'm here.
What are your thoughts on we're gonna get up the fourth is going to be on here shortly. We're gonna share it. What are your thoughts on how this should be written for presentation? Because we're really getting ready to fine tune wordsmith and get this over to the executive committee so they can schedule whatever they're going to schedule. I don't understand how the process is going to be, but I imagine we'll hear shortly.
Yes. I was so quiet because I'm personally drafting language right now, so I'm gonna play around with the words to see if I could get the the essence of the conversation
Uh-huh.
into, into words onto our document. So I'm doing that right now.
Thank you so much. Devin?
I'm, I'm still here pondering.
Yes, it's given us a lot to think about, that's for sure. Oh, here it is. It's coming up on the screen. Can you see it?
Mhm.
Article 3, citizenship, definition of a Virgin Islander. And then the citizenship is section 2. Can everybody see that? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Can
I
we
don't see
zoom in just a little bit?
Make it larger. I should know to do that.
At the bottom, there's a little plus sign.
Yes.
Great.
Is that better? Is that helping? There you go.
That's
Thank you,
great.
Mr. Wells.
Perfect.
Okay, Article 3, citizenship.
Mm-mm. We're not dealing with citizenship. We're just
No,
dealing with
no, citizens of the Virgin Islands.
Well, that's the article, Devin. And then the first
The
section.
first section is the
Oh,
definition.
okay. My bad. Okay,
Yeah,
but
and then,
we're dealing with section 1, right?
yes, it says a Virgin Islander is a person born in the Virgin Islands, or B, a person who is a descendant of at least one parent who was born in the Virgin Islands. And then citizens of the Virgin Islands are A, all persons born in the Virgin Islands and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, or B, all persons born outside the Virgin Islands who are citizens of the United States and who have been domiciled in the Virgin Islands for at least 1 year, or C, all former Danish citizens who, on January 17th, 1917, resided in the Virgin Islands of the United States and were residing. That doesn't make sense. That's not grammatically correct. And were resided in those islands or in the United States or Puerto Rico on February 27th, February 25th, I'm sorry, 1927, and who did not make the declaration requiring to preserve their Danish citizenship by Article 6 of the treaty entered into on August 4th, 1916, between the United States and Denmark, or who, having made such a declaration, have heretofore renounced or may hereafter renounce it by a declaration, oh, it's worthy, before a court of record, or D, subject to the enactment of appropriate federal legislation, all persons born in the Virgin Islands residing outside of the United States, its territories, and possessions between January 17th, 1917, and June 28, 1932, and not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and who are not citizens or subjects of any foreign country. (1917). Okay. Oh, that's a lot there. Okay.
All right, but our topic area is the definition of Virgin Islander. That's what we're debating now, right?
Yes.
All right. So the other citizenship language is there's a lot going on there. I'll say that.
There's a lot in there.
I got to read it to digest it. I've never really seen that language before.
So are we good with a person born like a Virgin Island is a person born in the Virgin Islands?
I'm not good with it. I think that B should be opened up. A person who's a descendant of at least one descendant born in the Virgin Islands.
B, a person who is a descendant of
Of a
at least one parent who was born in the Virgin Islands.
you could say of one of yeah. You have to use the word like lineage because it could be parent, grandparent, great grandparent, great great grandparent.
Well,
If
I was born in the Virgin Islands, but none of my relatives were descendants of anybody born in the Virgin Islands. None. Going back to great grandfather, great great grandfather, everybody was from the BVI.
I'm looking up something here.
So, Rudel, you were suggesting for B that what change we made there
It's,
or inclusion?
I'm suggesting, if I may,
Okay.
and this is a word that is not used quite often, a person who is a descendant, a person who is a descendant of a ascendant who was born in the Virgin Islands.
So instead of at least one parent,
No. A person who is a descendant of an ascendant who was born in the Virgin Islands.
so I'm saying you're taking out of at least one parent.
Yeah.
Comments?
Yeah.
Someone said something? You have 17 more minutes. I don't see anything. I don't. I would leave B just the way it is because to me it's crystal clear, but that's just my opinion.
uh, so the word I would use to wordsmith B, to give the meaning that Devin is looking for would be a person who is a descendant of at least one ancestor who was born in the Virgin Islands.
A person who is, repeat that again, please.
A person who is a descendant of at least one ancestor who was born in the Virgin Islands.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't rule out. Thank you.
My battery is going down, so I might lose you in a few minutes. So if
Where's
I'm
your
gone,
plug?
that's what happened. Huh?
Where's your plug?
I'm sorry.
Your plug. The charge, your charger.
The house was so hot, I'm out on the porch.
Oh, okay. Enjoying your view. Okay, I understand. A person who is a descendant of at least one parent who was who was born in the Virgin Islands. How does that sound to Kima and Miss Hendricks before you leave with your battery?
That
Yes,
isn't that what
we could leave that until maybe we could get some better language. But for right now, that will work.
Were you going to say something, Devin?
isn't that exactly the language in uh in the fourth?
No, the fourth is on the screen. Can you see that?
Yes, show me
A
the
person who is a descendant of at least one parent.
all right.
Oh, Rudel, do you see that that's the same thing that's on there on for B? A person who is a descendant of at least one parent who was born in the Virgin
All right,
Islands.
so he just changed the word to one person. which makes a
Yes,
which makes a
rather
big
than one
difference.
parent. Okay.
He said ancestor.
Yeah, he
He
did.
did?
Yeah, I
Yes.
said so the term ancestor, if I was wordsmithing it from the Fort language. Uh, I do have some language that I do want to put in the chat for
Okay.
review. Um, and it's actually a point that I've been considering prior. So this is the language.
And Imani doesn't think we should define it at all. Okay, Delegate Udale Hart said section 10. Definition of Virgin Islands and the Virgin Islands for the purpose of this Constitution. Virgin Islands shall mean the territory comprised of the islands of St. Thomas, St. John, St. Croix, and Water Island, together with their adjacent keys, rocks, and territorial waters as recognized by law. The term shall include all lands, submerged lands, airspace, and maritime zones subject to the jurisdiction of the Virgin Islands pursuant to applicable law.
I'm going to add one more piece to that, which is the next part.
Okay.
Let's read the next part.
Virgin Islander shall mean A, any person born in the Virgin Islands, B, any person who has at least one parent born in the Virgin Islands, C, any person who has been lawfully domiciled in the Virgin Islands for a period as prescribed by law and has been granted such status by statute. D, any descendant of the above as may be defined by law. I remember in the fifth, we had robust discussion about domicile and abode. Now the legal persons on here, domicile mean where you sleep, and abode means what? Where you are, or am I having it backwards? There were questions about domicile and abode.
Understood. We could wordsmith that part.
Okay.
So was Udel's contribution completely read?
Yes. Did you miss a part? I can do it again.
No, I didn't miss it. I just do it again. No, don't do the part about Virgin Islands, but Virgin Islander.
Virgin Islander shall mean A, any person born in the Virgin Islands, B, any person who has at least one parent born in the Virgin Islands, C, any person who has been lawfully domiciled in the Virgin Islands for a period as prescribed by law and has been granted such status by statute. D, any descendant of the above as may be defined by law. And it's being placed other in dark colors so you could see it better. Thank you, Mr. Wells. And I asked a question about domicile and abode because I remember that made some robust discussion when those two words were used in the Fifth Constitutional Convention. And I ask, is domicile where you actually sleep and abode is something different, or they're used interchangeably? Abode definition, a person's true, fixed, and permanent home, the place to which they intend to return after any absence. Okay, so my domicile is on St. John. Okay, thank you. I got my answer to that. Thanks. Abode, a place where a person dwells or lives regardless of permanence. It's simply a place where someone can reside. So your abode is different from where you're domiciled. Thank you. Any questions or comment? We have 9 more minutes. It seems like we need to review, rehearse, and probably rethink this area that we heard these presentations done on tonight.
May I, Chair
Yes,
Wells?
you may.
So I don't have any comments on the definition of a Virgin Islander, but I did take some time to draft language for the culture system of the Virgin Islands. So we won't have time to get to that tonight, and that's fine. We will need some additional meetings then. But yeah, so if anybody wants to check it out, it's in the Culture and Heritage workbook.
Is a government structure meeting the week of August 10th, right? And you're meeting every Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday until the end of August?
We are Monday, Thursday, Saturday. We just
Monday,
forgot. Mhm.
Thursday, Saturday
Yes,
until the end of August.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do something about the calendar.
Yes, we need to.
We'll work on it.
Okay. I know that John Abramson is going to be gone from the 9th to the 20 something, I think. There's no town hall meeting on the 9th, is there? Those are all canceled.
Right. We don't have any scheduled town hall meetings yet, but we should be planning some soon.
Okay.
I agree with Amani that we need to give some thought to this definition.
Yes,
And some thought to the language. I want to give some thought to the language crafted by Delegate Rudel Hodge as well.
I agree with that. And what I think we need to do is I'll have to look through the calendar and see when a date is available and see if I can write to the executive committee and get that date, because that meeting we should come and bring our suggestions for language and then be able to vote on acceptance or rejection of that language, and then look through our workbook and see what else, if anything, needs to be tightened up, wordsmithing or whatever. Then we could send our information on to the executive committee. Correct? I hope we're looking at the workbook, because lots of all of our information is in that, or cultural and heritage workbook. Thank you very much, Mr. Wells and Delegate Daniel, for keeping that up for us. Yeah, I need to. I understand that we need to look at what has been suggested today. We've had some thought-provoking information given. So I don't know when we're going to have another meeting. I would be sure to let everybody know in advance. But please review, reflect, and be ready for whenever that next meeting is so we can finish up this last section here on for our Culture and Heritage Standing Committee. So if there's no other business, any other comment, concern?
Let me just ask a question, if I may. Do we plan to consider? Well, I can't recall, but are we planning to consider any of that definition that in any of the section that we just looked at that concerns citizenship?
I don't know how to answer that. What we decide for Virgin Island might impact those other sections. So we
May I?
probably, yes, you may.
Delegate Carrington. So because that language is in the fourth and was not in the fifth, it is not language that we have been considering. But we can, as delegates, pull that language up to the sixth constitutional draft if we feel it's necessary. I just to my understanding, you cannot be a citizen of the Virgin Islands under current territorial and our colonial ties. You can only be a resident of the Virgin Islands currently.
That has been understanding as well.
So that language might have made sense when it was drafted in the 60s, 70s, but it might not make sense in the current context and legal understanding that we have. So I don't think it's something that we necessarily need to consider or wrap our heads around in terms of wordsmithing, because we already kind of established that the understanding is you can only be a resident of the Virgin Islands. You cannot be a citizen of the Virgin Islands.
Any other comment? Excuse me. Okay, excuse me, hearing none. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? So thank you so much for all that we've done tonight, and I'll let you know when the next meeting is. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Delegate.
Uh,
Tomorrow.